China's aircraft carrier program used to be the punchline of naval power. For years, the People's Liberation Army Navy, or PLAN, operated a single refurbished Soviet hull and called it a carrier. Analysts in Washington and London mocked it, US sailors joked about it, and even within China there was a quiet understanding that the Liaoning was mostly a training ship with a political purpose. But that era is over. China hasn't just built a real carrier, it has now commissioned the Type 3 class Fujian, the first non-US aircraft carrier in the world equipped with electromagnetic catapults. These are technically similar to what the US Navy uses on the cutting-edge Ford class. And while that alone would have been the biggest planned story of the decade, something even bigger is taking shape. China appears to be building a nuclear-powered supercarrier in its Type 4 class. Satellite images from the Jingnan shipyard reveal hull blocks that match reactor compartment geometry, far larger than anything we've seen on the Fujian. It's the strongest evidence yet that China intends to join the United States and France as the only countries on Earth operating nuclear-powered carriers today. And that's not even all. There's also the Type 76 amphibious assault ship with an electromagnetic catapult that opens up a whole new world to China. Welcome back to Task and Purpose. I'm Kyle, and in this episode we're going to break down the rise of China's carrier fleet ship by ship, what these carriers can actually do, what they can't do, what the US Navy is actually worried about or should be, and how China's unique mix of manned carriers, nuclear propulsion, drone platforms, and emerging amphibious assault ships could reshape war at sea. But first, let's talk about D-brand phone cases. Now, usually when we get a sponsor, they send us talking points and I'll write up a script, we'll send it to them, they'll approve it, and I'll record it. D-brand, they sent us this. So they sent their new tank case for the iPhone 17, which you can see here, it's still pretty thin, and I'll pop the phone case out as I continue to talk because I'm talented like that. Full disclosure, I don't have an iPhone 17, I had to buy this and I plan on returning it when I'm done with it because I'm a cheap bastard who has an iPhone 14. So like I said, this is the tank case and it's pretty nice, and I'll just go ahead and snap it right back into there. It's a nice case, good texture, feels strong, snaps right in as you just saw. And then this is one of my favorite things. It's really dumb, but bear with me. So we're gonna do a little ASMR if you can hear it. They also have these prism screen protectors, and here they are in the box. I'll go ahead and take it out. It's pretty nice. They come with two. Look at that, two of them. Real nice packaging too. So I'm gonna show you real quick how easy this is. I got the phone out already. I place it in right here. You really cannot screw this up because the buttons line up on the side. You might be able to see that. And then there's this little pull tab and you just pull it out. And then you squeegee it down with the squeegee that's in the package. It's pretty nice. So easy, a Marine could do it. So if I've convinced you, go to dbrand.com/taskandpurpose, where if you bundle a tank phone case and screen protectors, you get 24% off. No need for a code, just dbrand.com/taskandpurpose for 24% off a phone case and screen protectors. And every single purchase gets a set of D-brand playing cards. These things are pretty sweet. They sent me a set. Here's a few. They said they spent a year designing them. So head to dbrand.com/taskandpurpose, get a phone case, a screen protector, and playing cards, all for 24% off. Thank you, and thank you to D-brand for sponsoring this episode. If you go back to the early 2000s, China's Navy looked nothing like the one we see today. They had no aircraft carriers, only a handful of aging destroyers, and a submarine force built around noisy diesel boats. Most of the fleet stayed close to shore, exercises were tightly scripted, and the plan had almost no ability to sustain operations beyond the first island chain, a strategic line of small islands and archipelagos off the East Asian continent. It was a coastal defense navy with limited reach and even less experience. The idea that it would one day field multiple supercarriers would have sounded ridiculous. The big strategic question was whether China actually needed aircraft carriers. The official line was that China was focused on offshore defense, basically controlling the waters near its coast, and you don't really need carriers for that. But that doctrine quietly changed. Carriers serve multiple purposes in China's current strategy. Politically, they're symbols. A nation that wants to be perceived as a global maritime power shows up with carriers. Strategically, they help China extend its defensive perimeter by pushing the contested space farther from China's coastline and the first island chain that the US seeks to control, in many ways to keep China close to its own shores. Institutionally, they provide the training ground needed to develop naval aviators, deck crews, maintenance culture, and the operational experience that only comes from years at sea. This is where China's new carrier story begins. China's first carrier, the Liaoning, started life in the Soviet Union as the Kuznetsov-class Riga that was commissioned in 1998 and then renamed Varyag in 1990. China bought the unfinished hull from Ukraine in the late 1990s, towed it halfway around the world, and then spent nearly a decade rebuilding it. When it finally entered service, it wasn't a supercarrier. It is what is called a stow-bar carrier, and that's short takeoff but arrested recovery. The other variation is catapult-bar or catapult-assisted takeoff barrier-arrested recovery, like US carriers. It couldn't launch heavy aircraft because it had a ski jump instead of catapults, which meant no full-sized airborne early warning aircraft, no heavy strike loads, and limited sortie rates. But Liaoning had enormous value because it taught the plan how to do carrier aviation. Military aviation is already pretty complicated when you're operating from smooth, level, long runways that will always be in the same place. Add in a rolling, pitching, constantly moving short runway on the water, and things start to look impossible. Nothing has demonstrated more effectively how difficult carrier aviation is than the 1987 Nintendo video game Top Gun.
Top Gun, the video game. This is your dream shot.
Even with all of our fancy stuff and upgraded graphics, landing on a carrier is still considered among the most difficult tasks in all of aviation. Then came the Shandong of the Type 2 class, China's first domestically built carrier. Despite being new, launching in just 2017, it was still stow-bar with the same limitations. Shandong was a refinement, not really a revolution. For years, these two carriers served primarily as training platforms, conducting short deployments, pilot qualifications, and scripted exercises near shore. Western analysts dismissed them as publicity ships, and in a combat sense, that wasn't entirely wrong. Two carriers that can't even launch a fully loaded plane are light work for a carrier strike group loaded with dozens of combat aircraft, guided missile destroyers, and an attack submarine. But the plan wasn't trying to match the US Navy in 2018. It was trying to build the foundation for serious naval aviation into the 2030s. That foundation has led us directly to the ship that changed everything. In November 2025, China commissioned the Type 3 Fujian carrier. The ceremony had everybody who is anybody in China in attendance, and Chinese President Xi Jinping personally pressed the launch button inside the electromagnetic aircraft launch system, or EMALS, control station, a symbolic gesture that they broadcast very proudly across state media. Fujian is totally different from Liaoning and Shandong. It displaces about 80,000 tons, approaching the size of American supercarriers like the Ford or Nimitz class that come in around 100,000 tons. It has a flat deck and 3 electromagnetic catapults, making it catapult-bar, and for comparison, the Ford class has 4. The only other country that currently operates a catapult-bar carrier is France with its Charles de Gaulle, which was launched in 2001. Catapults, especially EMALS or EMALS, I've only ever read it, unlock an entirely different category of naval aviation. Besides being able to launch combat aircraft with a full complement of weapons and fuel, the Fujian can now launch the KJ-600, a fixed-wing airborne early warning aircraft comparable in concept to the American E-2 Hawkeye. Stow-bar carriers can't really launch aircraft like this because the larger aircraft just can't get fast enough to fly off the deck. Being able to launch the KJ-600 means Fujian's radar coverage and air control capabilities are now exponentially better, and it also ushers in true over-the-horizon capabilities. The catapults also mean increased sortie rates. This has always been a critical factor in carrier aviation. During the knockdown, drag-out fights in the Pacific in World War II between the Japanese and US and Allied ships, if you could get more aircraft into the air quicker than your enemy, you'd have an incredible advantage, and not much has changed today. And speaking of combat aircraft that can be launched off the catapult, China has two that are carrier capable. First is the J-15 Flying Shark. This is a twin-engine 4.5 generation multi-role fighter introduced in 2013. It is reported to be based on the reverse engineering of a Russian Su-33 and can fire the newer PL-10 and PL-15 air-to-air missiles, and even has the ability to refuel other aircraft in flight. Replacing the J-15 will be the J-35 stealth fighter. This is also a twin-engine multi-role fighter, but it is based on the FC-31 demonstrator and is considered to be 5th generation like the F-22 and F-35. It was only introduced as the J-35 back in September of 2025 and is the second stealth jet, along with the J-20, that China has in its arsenal. Like the US F-35, its electronic warfare suite supports advanced sensors, possible future directed energy systems, and can work alongside large, uncrewed aircraft, allegedly. Then there's the GJ-11 Sharp Sword, China's stealthy, uncrewed combat aircraft. This is a flying wing UCAV with internal weapons bays, radar evading shaping, and endurance that far exceeds any manned carrier jet in China's inventory. It first appeared in prototype form around 2013, but only in the last few years has it shown up in configurations suggesting carrier integration. The GJ-11 is designed for deep strike missions, electronic attack, and high-risk ISR runs, the kind of missions you normally wouldn't want to send a pilot on. And because it's uncrewed, it can be smaller, cheaper, and more expendable than a manned fighter, making it a natural partner for the J-35 in a future loyal wingman or strike swarm role, allegedly. However, as the US has learned through its own trials and tribulations, EMALS is complicated. The US Navy struggled for years with the Ford class as engineers worked through launch reliability, power fluctuations, and maintenance burdens. China claims rapid success, as they most always do, but the real test will be whether the Fujian can produce sustained sortie rates comparable to a US carrier. Even with EMALS, China still lacks the decades of experience required to run high-tempo deck operations. We will discuss more of the possible pitfalls facing China towards the end of the video, so stick around for that. Fujian is a turning point, but the plan's ambitions extend even farther into the realm of nuclear reactors and true long-range capabilities, so let's discuss those now. In November, satellite imagery from the Jingnan shipyard revealed features that OSINT types and our friends at the War Zone say are consistent with nuclear reactor compartments. These sections are significantly larger than those seen on the Fujian, suggesting a new carrier class entirely. If Type 4 is nuclear powered, China is taking a leap that only the United States and France have sustained in operating nuclear carriers. Nuclear propulsion gives a ship practically unlimited range and the ability to sustain high speeds, crucial for generating wind over deck conditions and maximizing sortie rates. It also provides enormous electrical power for electromagnetic catapults, advanced radar arrays, and future systems such as directed energy weapons. A nuclear carrier would allow China to deploy a carrier strike group much farther from home and for much longer periods. This could mean deeper forays into the Indian Ocean, or to the Persian Gulf, or even a complete circumnavigation of the globe. But China has never operated nuclear-powered surface ships, and this isn't something you can screw up. Yes, they have nuclear-powered submarines, but those reactors are smaller and operating under much different conditions. A nuclear carrier requires a disciplined maintenance culture, highly trained engineering teams, and decades of refinement. Type 4 represents possibly an enormous institutional leap. If China succeeds, it will finally have a true blue water carrier capability that rivals the United States. And this might not even be the biggest thing the United States has to worry about, so let's start talking about the Type 76. China is also rapidly developing the Type 76, one of the largest amphibious assault ships out there that looks like a conceptual cousin to the Marine Corps' Lightning carrier idea, but taken a step further. It's pretty close to being done, and it recently began its first sea trials. The US Lightning carrier, which we've discussed in a previous video, is a concept that imagines packing 16 to 20 F-35Bs onto an America-class or WASP-class amphib and using it as a budget-like carrier. It's clever, but it still relies on short takeoff man jets, and the ship wasn't designed from the keel up for that type of mission. In typical Marine fashion, they're just making it work. But the Type 76 is different. It appears to be the first amphibious assault ship built from scratch around the idea of launching uncrewed combat aircraft. Imagery suggests that it has an electromagnetic catapult specifically sized for UAVs. That means it wouldn't be limited to short takeoff vertical landing aircraft or helicopters. It could put fixed-wing drones into the air with real payloads, real range, and real persistence. In other words, where the Lightning carrier is a creative workaround, the Type 76 is a purpose-built solution. It merges the troop-carrying vehicle hauling role of an LHD with the flight operations of a light carrier and the mass launch potential of a drone mothership. In a Taiwan scenario, this hybrid design becomes especially important. A ship like the Type 76 could provide continuous ISR over the strait, jam Taiwanese or US sensors, hunt naval targets with UCAVs, or conduct persistent strike operations on land, all while keeping manned aircraft farther back under the protection of land-based air power. It essentially gives China a way to push air power forward without risking its most valuable pilots or jets. It also suggests that China isn't simply copying American concepts, it's trying to leap ahead of them, and it seems to be working. China could become the first nation to operate manned supercarriers, nuclear carriers, and drone carriers together, and they could also be building mini carriers as well. Imagery and broadcasts have shown a ship that bears a striking resemblance to what many might call a drone carrier, just much smaller. Some speculate that it is a test vessel used for trials on drones or other aircraft, or that maybe it was a concept the plan decided to abandon. If it is in fact a mini drone carrier, it would fit perfectly into China's layered anti-access area denial strategy. In today's environment, strength in numbers is a big deal. The goal isn't necessarily to smash an opponent into submission with a giant hammer, but to hit them with thousands of small hammers. A cute little boat that can launch and recover drones far ahead of a valuable fleet isn't the worst idea. Navy, now is a good time to make some major progress with our own drone boats. Take notes. Understanding China's carriers requires abandoning the idea that Beijing is trying to replicate US Navy doctrine. The US Navy builds carriers to project power worldwide, often alone across vast distances. China seems to be building carriers to operate inside a fortified sphere of land-based missiles, drones, aircraft, and sensor networks. China's carriers, at least for now, are meant to control the near seas, support a blockade of Taiwan, and gradually extend influence into the Indian and Pacific Oceans. They operate as part of a layered system that includes DF-21D and DF-26 anti-ship ballistic missiles, long-range bombers, submarines, surface combatants, and an expanding constellation of satellites and drones. Several developments deserve real attention. The combination of J-35 fighters and KJ-600 early warning aircraft gives China a credible carrier air wing. The expansion of the Naval Aviator Pipeline suggests China is serious about learning high-tempo operations. A nuclear carrier would allow China to sustain deployments far from home, changing the strategic balance in the Indian Ocean and elsewhere. And China's rapid progress in naval drones could allow it to field a fleet-level unmanned system far sooner than the US. We have a tendency here in the United States to simultaneously dismiss Chinese military progress while also making it out to be a giant, unbeatable threat. The truth is probably in the middle of the two. The speed at which they've built these ships is remarkable, especially as the US struggles to build really any ships. But this could also be creating long-term problems in reliability that haven't yet been revealed. As we see in other massive projects in China, like infrastructure, those often look great on the surface, and then they fall apart years later. Carrier operations are also incredibly difficult to pull off, and the US has decades of experience in this realm. Making a survivable vessel is also really complicated, and the US has learned these lessons from combat, but also in extensive sink tests. The last time that we tried to sink one of our own carriers was in 2005, and it was damn near impossible. For 4 weeks, we pounded the USS America, which was retired in 1996, with a whole bunch of different weapons and explosives. To be fair, the goal wasn't really to sink it right away, but to hit certain spots and see what we can learn about building a more survivable ship. Still, even after 4 weeks and hitting it with so many explosives, just so many explosives, we had to board the vessel and plant explosives to scuttle it. Lessons learned from these exercises are rolled into new ships like USS Gerald R Ford, making them even more survivable, more resilient, and just all but, impossible to sink. And as we mentioned before, it takes a lot of training to make carrier operations effective. Launching hundreds of sorties over the course of a few days is not an easy task, but it is something the US Navy does fairly regularly. This is only because we have decades of training and lessons learned that have accumulated to today. Still, we would be fools to dismiss China's carrier fleet, which is rapidly becoming a force to be reckoned with. So let us know what you think in the comments, and by all means argue with the countless bots that will find this video and talk about how China is #1 and all that stuff. I like to think in this one we were pretty fair to China because what they're doing is kind of remarkable, and we should probably start paying close attention and make that shipbuilding stuff a little more serious. But anyways, leave your comments on what you think. I wrote the script and Savvy edited the video, and now it's channel update time, where in the past few weeks I've given out my email. It's kyle.gunn@taskandpurpose.com for any service members or really anybody that over the holiday season might hit a wall, get a little low, maybe you're stuck in the barracks and it sucks because you're on duty, or maybe you went back home and you realize it kind of sucks because you changed a little bit and your high school friends suck. Anyways, if you find yourself low during the holidays, shoot me an email, reach out to me, and we'll work it out together. All right. Other than that, hit up the store. It's store.taskandpurpose.com. You can buy this shirt or many others there. And we have a new code. It is BLOCKLEAVE. That gets you 20% off. This is only going to be carried through the end of the year. Take 20% off. You've been sitting on the fence. Go ahead and do it. Other than that, I'm shutting up because this was a long video. I am Kyle, your friendly ginger producer man. You are all dismissed. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you next time.